All right, got one more silver dollar in my pocket. The rate of inflation may be eroding the purchasing power. Welcome to another exciting rendition of macroeconomics. This is part two of inflation, looking at measuring inflation, focusing on the consumer price index. Some other key formulas will be reiterated in this video for additional practice. So thankfully, our economy is no longer on the gold standard for which we have a modern financial banking system to thank, the Federal Reserve System, which has really been beefed up through the course of the 20th century in terms of its policy influence and forecasting for macroeconomic health. Apart from the Federal Reserve, there are other agencies and institutions that help us keep track of macroeconomic health, including the Bureau of Labor Statistics, as well as the Bureau for Economic Analysis. And we have these agencies to thank for the Consumer Price Index. The Consumer Price Index is compiled by the Bureau of Labor Statistics every month, and the information is used primarily to reflect annual changes in price levels for the macroeconomy. CPI is a really important index. Social Security benefits and some tax brackets are pegged to the inflation rate, and so people keep a close eye on CPI to understand really basic personal finance decisions that will need to be made. In particular, people living on fixed incomes who are really hurt by inflation that occurs without any anticipation, without being foreseen. All right, so this slide of the notes, you're given the formula for CPI, price of the market basket over the price of a market basket in the base year. So current year market basket prices over initial year market basket prices is the price index. And keep in mind that the base year is always listed as 100, and typically today we use 1982 to 1984 prices as the base year, but in any problem that you're given, that could change. So just be sure you know what year within the problem is the base year, and just adjust accordingly. So here in this example in 2009, we know if the index is 125, that means since the base year, 1997 in this example, there's been 25% inflation. Okay, but keep in mind that prices may rise again, and we would have to compare prices in 09 to say 2010 prices to see what the rate of inflation is. We wouldn't go back to the base year in some cases, such as was the example that we did in class today. Okay, here you're looking at the effects of inflation, and this is important. You're thinking about going to college in the future. Hey, just note that the trend is upward tuition and fees, far outpacing consumer prices in general. Colleges and universities seem to be in high demand these days, and these prices, regardless of whether or not they're fair or affordable, are certainly on the up and up. All right, let's cut to the chase. It's time to calculate nominal GDP, real GDP, and inflation, which is a lot of what was done in class today, but here's some more practice. All right, so you're given 5 years in this table. We see units of output and price. Okay, we could find nominal GDP, no problem. Multiply quantity times the price, and by doing so, we would be getting the unadjusted gross domestic product. All right, so we know how to find nominal GDP for sure, and that's easy enough as we go through this practice problem. Now, to identify real GDP, we need some more information, of course, except for this first year, because this would be our base year, and so real GDP would be the same as nominal. All right, and so in the second year, real GDP remains unchanged because our units of output did not change. So to go back, we multiply quantity 10 by the base year price to find real GDP. In this example, the base year price is year one prices, or $4. And so in the next year we have 60, and in year 4, you guess, real GDP would be 80. Okay, 25 times 4 gives us 100. So to find then the CPI, or the price index for this case, all we need to do is essentially looking for the GDP deflator, which we did in class. Divide nominal GDP over real GDP, and we get 100. That's the base year. All right, now the next year, dividing 50 by 40 gives us 125, and we continue on, and you see that the origin of the consumer price index is, or can be, derived from nominal GDP and real GDP. The inflation rate is found by subtracting the current year, year 2, year 3, year 4, 5, from the base year, and so the inflation rate is as follows. All right, seeing the change, there's no change in price level here. Prices are rising 25%. Okay, this is the example I gave in class as well today. Whoa, Mr. Miller, okay, we went from 25 to 50. Isn't that a 25% increase? But no, keep in mind, we use the percent change in price formula here, or the growth rate formula, as mentioned in class, to find the difference between 50 and 25, which is 25. We divide by year 1, CPI, or the original CPI, 125, and we come up with 20%. All right, followed by 33%, and then inflation actually falls. There's deflation, negative 50. Okay, in addition to CPI, there are 2 other price indices that we'll discuss. There's producer price index, which is not as heavily focused on as CPI because it pertains to producers, obviously, measuring the cost of a typical basket of goods and services containing raw commodities such as steel or electricity or coal and so on, that are purchased by producers. So these are the inputs that may commonly be purchased by producers. So just another measure of perhaps changes that could occur in the level of prices for producers, which is important, right? Part of the circular flow. And the point, of course, is collecting data to serve as an early warning signal for changes in inflation rate that may happen. So the last most widely used price measure is the GDP deflator. It isn't exactly a price index, although it serves the same purpose. And you can recall how we distinguish between nominal GDP, or GDP in current prices, and real GDP, GDP calculated using the prices of a base year. And the GDP deflator is similar in that it's a price index. For a given year, it's equal to 100 times the ratio of nominal GDP for that year to the real GDP for that year expressed in prices of a selected base year. Since real GDP is currently expressed in $2005, the GDP deflator for 2005 is equal to 100. So that's the base year. So GDP deflator is no different than CPI when it's listed as an index number. So base year is 100. You can easily see when there's a rise or when there's inflationary pressure. So probably the most important point about the different inflation rates, CPI, GDP deflator, generated by the 3 measures of prices that I've mentioned, is that they usually move real closely together. Producer price index tends to fluctuate more than either of the other two measures, and we want to consider that these are all measures that do effective essentially the same thing, but they just measure different things or different prices. All right, so we're looking with the GDP deflator at increase in price of goods bought by firms of the government that would show up in GDP deflator. So it's more comprehensive than CPI, so it's valuable for that reason. All right, but of course only goods and services produced domestically. So another thing to note. And we have that formula for the GDP deflator, or the GDP price index as it's known. Keep in mind you would want to multiply by 100 to make that an index value. All right, the AC/DC guy, where we borrow a lot of phrases and resources, has an excellent video on calculating GDP deflator and some good practice there. I recommend you check that out after you view this lecture. as well as his video on CPI. So here you're given the formula again for GDP deflator and nominal GDP. So these variables can be rearranged in order to find one that may be excluded from a problem. If you're trying to solve for nominal GDP, for instance, you would simply multiply deflator times real GDP and divide by 100. All right, so there are some practice calculations that I would encourage you all to work, and we could review these in class if you'd like. But I really need to wrap this video up by discussing the three causes of inflation and the effects on purchasing power of your dollars. So three causes of inflation. The first is the government prints too much money. This is called monetary policy, and we'll be discussing this later on this semester in much more depth. But the quantity theory, as it's known, is a rarity in the United States, although some may disagree with recent policies. For instance, the Federal Reserve has just recently, in 2014-15, decided they're going to scale back on the purchase of government bonds, which was inserting $80 billion of currency every month when they bought back these borrowed bonds from individuals around the world and in the United States. So the idea is that some government action, printing money and injecting it into the economy, is of course to bring us back towards some sort of expansion of the business cycle, right? To keep us on that track. And we talked about the other unstable situations such as hyperinflation. That's a real danger. Okay, so that's obviously not the goal of the government. They try to keep money supply in tune with the rate at which it's being used in the economy. So with this theory, there are more rich people with the same amount of products. It is another way to kind of think about it. So you have more money, but those dollars are chasing after limited resources. All right, so banks may refuse to lend, GDP falls, and we've seen some real examples of that in Bolivia, Peru, and Brazil, Germany after World War I, which I've mentioned before. All right, so quantity theory of money. If the real GDP in a year is 400 billion, let's say, the amount of money in the economy is only 100 billion, how are we paying for things? All right, so the velocity of money is the average times a dollar is spent and respent in a year. This will not be on the unit test for Unit 1, but we will come back to this concept more so in Unit 2. All right, so quantity theory of money, that's related to this first cause of inflation. Okay, the second cause of inflation, and we'll skip ahead here beyond this money velocity, is oh my goodness, forgot about these notes. Demand pull inflation. So this is a basic condition when workers are demanding higher wages and they receive those wages, which gradually increases cost for producers, whom then raise their prices. So it's a cyclical effect, coupled with the third cause of inflation known as cost push, whereby you have higher production costs and increases in prices. And the most common example of this is a negative supply shock, whereby resource cost or energy cost may increase in the short run, which forces producers to do something about that. So they raise their prices, they raise their costs. Workers all the while still demanding higher wages, and you have inflation. Okay, so the wage price spiral is a perpetual process, and you can read more about this in your notes. So to conclude, at the end of this PowerPoint, there are some key formulas, and let me see if I can rapidly get you there here on this video, which I now realize I will have to redo at some point. It's so sloppily done, but that's all right. It's life, right? So here are those key formulas: consumer price index, the index number, price changes, real GDP, output growth, per capita GDP deflator. All right, happy studies.